Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be going over the LEQ, which stands for Long Essay Question. It's one of the three writings that you'll be doing on the AP exam. So let's get started. As I said, LEQ stands for Long Essay Question. It is the third essay that you write on the AP exam. The LEQ is similar to the DBQ in structure, but it's different in that you don't have to read any documents or sources to write the LEQ. Instead, you'll read the prompt and come up with arguments and pieces of evidence from your memory, from the things that we learned in class. So the LEQ is actually assessing your content memorization skills as well as your argumentative skills. Whereas the DBQ is more skills-based and not a lot of content. The LEQ is mostly content and a little bit of skills. Because you do have to write your essay framed around one of the C historical thinking skills, like comparison or causation or continuity change over time. Those are the historical thinking skills or the C skills, and I'll list them all in this PowerPoint when we get there. LEQ is worth 15% of your exam score. It's not the majority, but you do need to write a solid LEQ if you want to earn a 4 or a 5. If you don't, it's going to be harder for you to get the 5 on this exam. Okay, lastly, you will have 100 minutes to write your LEQ and the DBQ. You get the two essays in 100-minute block. So you'll be able to see the DBQ and the LEQ prompts at the same time. We recommend that you spend about an hour on the DBQ and about 40 minutes on the LEQ, but you can move freely between both of them. And the LEQ is actually going to give you 3 prompts. You're going to pick the one that you want to respond to. And the first prompt, which will actually be labeled question 2, that one will cover content from 1200 to 1750. So it could be from unit 1 and 2, or it could even cover land-based empires in unit 3 or European exploration of the Americas in unit 4. Then you'll get option B, which will be labeled as question 3 on the exam. That one will cover content from 1450 to 1900. So it could be a unit 3 and 4 topic, or it could be a topic from unit 5, revolutions, or unit 6, imperialism. Then the third option, which will be labeled question 4 on the LEQ, that one will cover 1750 to 2001 content. So that would be either a question from unit 5, 6, or unit 7, 8, 9, which is the global conflicts, Cold War, decolonization, and globalization. Okay, so the LEQ prompt looks the same pretty much every year. It follows the same structure, just like the DBQ uses the same structure every year. It's going to give you a statement about a historical process, and then it'll say, develop an argument that evaluates how something does something to something else in a certain time period. And sometimes they use the time period years, like from 1450 to 1750, but sometimes they say centuries, like they might say in the 17th century or in the 19th century. And those century years really mess kids up. I've definitely had years where the prompt asked kids about the 21st century, and kids didn't know what the 21st century is, and they wrote about the wrong time period. So 21st century is 2000s. We are living in the 21st century. So 21st century is 2000s, whereas 20th century is the 1900s. It's always like one back from the century. So 20th century, 1900s. 19th century is the 1800s, 17th century is the 1600s. It's always like a year back. So if they're giving you the dates, like 1200 to 1450, great. If they're giving you the centuries, just go back a century. So just go back 100 years. So again, we're living in the 21st century. That's the 2000s. Help yourself to remember. If you get the 15th century, 15, it goes back to 1400s. Okay, so here are some examples of LEQ prompts. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which technological innovations or transfers, led to increased economic growth from 1200 to 1450. Develop an argument that evaluates how the Columbian Exchange affected people in the Americas in the time period. Notice that there are verbs in all of these sentences, and the verbs are meant to indicate one of the historical thinking skills. So the historical thinking skills are the C skills: causation, comparison, continuity, change over time. This prompt, technological innovations or transfers led to economic growth. This is implying a causation essay. So your arguments would be effects of technological innovations or transfers. Ideally, you'd focus your essay around causation. The second one, Columbian Exchange affecting people in the Americas. That's also causation. Effect implies an effect, cause and effect. Whereas sometimes you'll get the verb challenge or transform. Challenge and transform imply continuity, change over time. Your essay would be about ways that things have stayed the same or changed over time. So try to keep that in mind. Look for the verb. Try to focus around whatever skill is attached to that verb. And I'll show you that as we get a little further in here. So again, historical thinking skills are the C skills. Comparison is how are things similar or different and why. Causation is how does one thing affect another and why. And continuity, change over time, is how have things stayed the same or changed over time and why. The LEQ gives you a point for focusing your essay around one of these skills. So you want to make sure your arguments are either comparisons, effects, continuities, or changes over time so that you can get that skill point on the rubric. And again, I'll show you what I mean when we get to a specific LEQ prompt. Okay, so here's the framework. Here's the structure of the LEQ, the outline. It is overall similar to the DBQ, but the difference here is that you provide the examples and evidence from your memory in the LEQ, and you frame your thesis around that historical thinking skill. And again, this is like based on your memory. It's content memorization. It's not just argumentation. You'll start with an intro paragraph, just like the DBQ. The intro is going to have a 3 to 5 sentence contextualization where you set the scene. Then you'll give your thesis that contains 2 to 3 arguments to represent the body paragraphs. Those arguments come from your memory. You have to think of them on your own. They shouldn't name specific evidence. They should be general arguments. And it's okay if you have 2, if you have 3, amazing. But if you just have 2, it's all right. As long as there's enough evidence in each body paragraph, you'll be okay. There will be 2 to 3 body paragraphs based on however many arguments are in your thesis. You'll start with a topic sentence that contains your argument written clearly. Then you will provide a piece of evidence or an example, something that you learned in class, a fact. Like, for example, Shivaji led the Maratha people challenging the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in whatever year. Or another piece of evidence. In Christianity, they allowed women to join monastic orders because Christianity promoted spiritual equality of all their believers. Or you could say one mass atrocity that happened during the 1900s is the Cambodian genocide. You just have to like name the fact, name the example, but then you follow it up with an explanation of how that example fits your argument. And you can maybe connect that to a skill, like the effect of this event is, or you could say this is similar to this other thing because, or you could say this will change after this time period because. It's okay to use a skill in that explanation, but you definitely want to use the explanation to connect it to an argument. If you just state the fact, that gets you 1 point. But if you explain it, that can get you additional points. You're then going to have another fact, another piece of evidence, something we learned in class. You'll follow it up with an explanation, how it goes with your argument. And then you're going to have a sentence that connects your argument to the skill. So here's where you can then, if you didn't do it in the explanation, You can then bring in a comparison, a causation, or a continuity change over time explanation. I'll show you an example of this in a moment, but you definitely need to have a sentence in there with that skill component and use the skill that works best with the prompt. You don't have to. You can use either of the three skills, but it's probably best to pick whichever one goes with the prompt, goes with the verb in the prompt. You'll then end with the concluding sentence. And when you're done with your essay, write a conclusion. The conclusion is for you to restate the thesis, but don't copy it word for word from the intro, because what I'm noticing is that our thesis statements in the intro are not strong enough on their own. The arguments are not clear enough, but the arguments that you're writing in your topic sentences look better. They're a little more clear now that you've had time to think about it. So look at those topic sentences, pull out the argument, and rewrite your thesis based on those clear arguments. That way we can ensure that we get the thesis point and don't miss it because we had an unclear or vague argument in the intro or one that was worded in a poor way. So you're going to rewrite your thesis in the conclusion. That's the biggest thing that I'm taking away from having scored DBQs this quarter. Okay, so that's our structure, that's our outline. Now here's an example of a prompt and some things that you could write. So here's an example prompt. Develop an argument that evaluates how the Columbian Exchange affected people in the Americas from 1450 to 1750. This is a Unit 4 prompt. It goes with European exploration of the Americas. And the prompt is asking us for causation. It's asking us to explain the effects of the Columbian Exchange on people in the Americas, not on people in Europe or in Africa, but on people in the Americas. So I've got to come up with arguments based on what I remember from class. So if I pick causation as my skill, I can name 3 effects. Okay. I could also pick continuity change over time as my skill too. Even though that's not the verb, I could still use that. Ways that the Columbian Exchange changed people in the Americas versus way that they stayed the same. I chose to focus on the change part. I said the Columbian Exchange greatly changed society in the Americas by introducing new food crops and domesticated animals that would transform native culture. My second argument, it introduced new African and European populations that contributed to syncretic beliefs. And it introduced new diseases, which are going to decimate native populations. So I will have 3 body paragraphs. Each of those colored areas will be a separate body paragraph. I'll use those arguments in my topic sentence, and then I'll provide evidence for each. So the evidence I want to come up with is new food crops and new animals for body paragraph 1. New populations is going to be my evidence for body paragraph 2. New diseases will be for body paragraph 3. And I want to make sure my explanations and my skill sentence is focused on how they change life. How they change life, not just the effect, but what was it like before? How is it like now? Because that shows the change. Okay. And again, all of these arguments come from my own personal knowledge. They didn't come from documents or sources. I had to remember all of this from my studying. So LEQ is based on content memorization. All right. So here's what I wrote. In my thesis, I gave my 3 arguments. In my body paragraphs, I need to provide the evidence, or the examples, and the explanation to support my arguments. They come from my memory. Ideally, I have 2 examples per argument, and I explain each of them. So body paragraph 1 is going to be new food crops and domesticated animals transform native culture. My first example is going to be the horse. For example, the Spanish brought domesticated horses to the Americas for the first time. That's my fact. Now I've got to explain it. How did it change life? These horses changed the culture of the Plains Indians by facilitating a nomadic lifestyle, using horses as transportation, and combining the use of bow and arrow on horseback to promote a warrior lifestyle. I've showed the change. The horse changed society. I've got my fact and my explanation. I came up with a second one. This time I picked a food crop. Additionally, Spanish settlers in Mesoamerica brought wheat and grape crops to the Americas. to be harvested for Catholic religious ceremonies. They then set up the encomienda system and required the natives to farm on the hacienda instead of live their native lifestyle as they did before Spanish colonization. This new coercive labor system limited the activities of the natives and often resulted in them dying from diseases contracted from close contact with the Europeans. I highlighted that sentence because not only does that show a change, it also has the effect. Many natives died because of their contact with the Europeans. So I named my fact, the Spanish brought new crops. Then I named an additional fact, they used a labor system to force the natives to farm. And then I talked about the change and the effect of that. So I've actually built in two skills here in my explanation. Another body paragraph would be about new European and African populations that lead to syncretic belief systems in America. For that one, I gave an example. As part of the Atlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas by Europeans to work on sugar plantations in the Caribbean. That's my fact. The Africans brought their religious traditions with them and combined those spiritual beliefs with European Christianity, and sometimes with indigenous American beliefs to produce new syncretic belief systems like Candomblé in Brazil and Vodun in Haiti. Those are my two concrete new syncretic belief systems, and I've shown how the Africans forcibly being brought to the Americas led to that new syncretic belief system. I've also mentioned that it blended European Christianity with African beliefs to show that it is actually syncretism. So that counts as my evidence for that second body paragraph. And here's another piece of evidence. Ideally, there's two in each. I only have so much space on the screen. But there we go. I mean, there was one example for you. My third body paragraph, new diseases decimated native populations. Europeans introduced smallpox to the indigenous Americans, that's a fact. Because of geographic distance and lack of domesticated animals, the Americans did not have any biological resistance to smallpox. Therefore, their bodies could not fight off the smallpox, and 90% of the indigenous Americans die from smallpox. I've given some background information and some causes of why smallpox was so harmful on the natives. And then I've showed an effect of it also. This helps contribute to the European conquest of the Americas, such as in the Aztec Empire in Mesoamerica and the Incan Empire in South America. Because all these natives are dying, the effect is they can't fight back against the Spanish, who are then able to set up empires in Mesoamerica and South America. So in addition to my continuity change over time, I've also added in an effect down here. That way I'm hitting all my skills. You only need one of them, but I've hit multiple. That way we can get that skill point for the rubric. Okay. I wanted to show you another example of incorporating a skill into a body paragraph because there were some questions about this today in class. Let's say I have a completely different prompt, and this prompt asks me to develop an argument that evaluates the impact of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism on Asian societies from 1200 to 1450. This is a Unit 1 essay. And this one is going to be about impacts. So it could be effects. I could also do continuity change over time. I could also do comparison, and I could compare the impact of Hinduism and Buddhism and Confucianism on different Asian societies. That would work as well. I actually, in my example, I'm going to use comparison. I'm going to compare the ways that the religions affected societies. So I just focused on one body paragraph. One of my body paragraphs would be about religion and social hierarchy. And for my topic sentence, I would say from 1200 to 1450, religions helped contribute to the development of social hierarchies, in Asian societies. That's my argument. Religion helps develop social hierarchy. Example. For example, Chinese societies, like in the Tang and Sung dynasty, had a social hierarchy based on Confucianism, which placed scholar bureaucrats at the top, peasants underneath, and artisans and merchants at the bottom. So I've listed my fact. Now I need to explain it. Unlike other societies, peasants were towards the top of the hierarchy in China because peasants were valued for fulfilling their good Confucian role in China by providing everyone with food. In fact, to be seen as a good Confucian leader would require that the emperor would sponsor irrigation projects and support agriculture. So it makes sense that farmers would be at the top of the hierarchy. I've given my explanation as to how Confucianism related to the social hierarchy. Confucianism values following your role. It also values agriculture. So peasants are at the top. They're performing their good Confucian role by farming. I also have a little bit of comparison implied in there because peasants are normally at the bottom. So have a little bit of comparison by saying unlike other societies. Then I give my second example. Additionally, Hinduism has a caste system. It's derived from an ancient scripture from the Rig Veda, where the 4 levels in the hierarchy were formed from the sacrificing of Purusha. Brahmins at the top are priests, Kshatriyas are leaders and warriors, Vaishyas are artisans, Shudras are poor farmers. So I've identified the hierarchy. I've also said that the hierarchy is going to lead to what people's jobs are. And I say Hindu societies in India maintain this hierarchy. But then for my skill part, okay, I bring in comparison by presenting a new piece of evidence that contradicts the other two to show a difference. However, Buddhism doesn't endorse a social hierarchy. It's different. This is because the founder formed Buddhism as a reaction against Hinduism. He supported the spiritual equality of his followers, even allowing women to serve in monastic lifestyles, and opposed the inequality and suffering of the lower classes, while those of higher classes, like Gautama himself, who's a Kshatriya, lived luxurious lives. I've shown the difference now between the impact of Buddhism and the impact of Hinduism. Hinduism and Confucianism both have social hierarchies that determine your role in society, whereas Buddhism does not. They had a differing belief, so there's not going to be this religiously based social hierarchy in a Buddhist society. So there's an example of using a skill, using a contradicting piece of evidence for the comparison skill to show a difference. Okay. Lastly, here's the rubric. The LEQ is worth 6 points, not 7. You get a thesis point, just like the DBQ, responding to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. You get a point for contextualization, just like with the DBQ. You've set the scene by providing the background info. Then you get a point for listing evidence. If you give examples of evidence relevant to the prompt topic, you get a point, and you want to aim for 4 total in your essay. That's just naming, China has a spam social hierarchy. Hinduism has a caste system. That's just naming the evidence. But you get an additional point if you use that evidence to support an argument. These are your explain sentences, just like the DBQ. You want to explain how 4 pieces of evidence support the argument. That way you can get that additional point and earn 2 points instead of 1. And I have on the board, aim for 2 pieces of evidence per argument. So if you have 2 body paragraphs, you'll have 4 total pieces of evidence. If you have more, great, that can get you an extra point. But I would say 4 pieces of evidence is what you want to aim for total in your essay. Last is the analysis and reasoning component. You get 1 point for, sorry, Belle. You get 1 point for framing your essay around a skill, comparison, continuity, change over time. If you have your skill sentence and you use your explanations to demonstrate a skill, then you'll get that 1 point. But if you have a more complex argument where you've talked about similarities and differences, talked about continuities and changes, multiple causes, multiple effects, maybe connections across time periods, maybe you've qualified or modified your argument, which means you've changed it a little bit along the way. Like maybe you say religion definitely contributes to social hierarchies, but then you bring in your Buddhism example and say, actually, in this case, it doesn't. That could be a way to get complexity. So I do think I have some kids who will earn the complexity point, not all, but I have some that are already bringing up contradictions in their essays. They're looking at issues from different perspectives. So that could get them the complexity point. But I think most people hopefully will get this 1 skill point here. So there we go. I would say our goal for this one is if you want to pass, you definitely want 3 out of 6. If you want a 4 or a 5, you want to get 4 or 5 points out of 6 for the LEQ. So there we go. That's the LEQ. Feel free to look through the at-home study plan to get writing practice. Some of the writing practice examples are LEQs, and you can see the scoring guidelines that go with them. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and feel free to ask questions if you have any in class.